So I've traveled all the way down here to Central Florida to visit my dad, and of all things that I'm going to be driving, it's my old 2003 SVT Focus, which I sold to him just prior to purchasing my 2011 Fiesta. So this is a great opportunity to kind of compare and contrast the difference between the Fiesta ST, which I've now had for just about 2 months, and my 2003 SVT Focus, which I owned for a couple of years and which my dad now owns. And you know, there's a lot of similarities between the two cars. They were both developed by SVT. They're both front-wheel drive hatchbacks, sold both in the United States and in Europe. This, of course, was the ST170 in Europe, as in the SVT Focus in the United States. The Fiesta ST is, of course, same name in both markets, but there's a lot of similarities between these two cars. And so I kind of look at what are some of the things, how do they compare to each other? Well, first let's talk about the SVT Focus. It's got 180 horsepower. It's a 2-liter dual overhead cam, normally aspirated Z-Tech engine. It's mated to a 6-speed manual gearbox, just like the Fiesta ST. But one thing that is really different about this car, of course, is that it's still all very much mechanical. There isn't a bunch of electronic gizmos inside this thing. But anyway, back to what kind of sets the SVT Focus apart. Okay, it's got much bigger brakes, monster 300mm front rotors. It's got rear disc. It has different front rear bumper covers, a rear spoiler on the back, side skirts, very much just like any SVT or ST product would have. It's got 17-inch wheels. This particular model has Michelin Pilot tires put on it instead of the original Continentals. This also has the European Appearance Package, which includes the Recaro seats, which are downright awesome. They are full leather, they are heated, and they include heated mirrors, an engine block heater, and one of my favorite options, HID projector headlamps. And these things are amazing. You turn on these headlamps, and it is like turning on the sun. I love it. That's one thing that I really miss about my Fiesta ST is the projector HID headlamps. These things are fantastic. So, in being an SVT product, you know, it's going to have a different suspension package on it. Of course, I already mentioned the brakes, different upgraded wheels, tires. So, it's a lot of the same type of philosophy of what you'd see in the Fiesta ST. Same type of design, same type of car. So let's pull into a parking spot here and let's talk about how they compare. Now that we've taken it for a little drive around the block. So anyway, all right. The SVT Focus has been an amazing car ever since it was created. I mean, this thing has got a huge following. The Mark I Focus, in my mind, is definitely a high point in Ford design. And it's also a great world car. Kind of reignited the world car philosophy inside Ford Motor Company. We got a very similar car on both sides of the Atlantic. And I owned this particular car as well as a 2000 Focus ZX3, and I love both of them very much. Fantastic cars, huge following in the aftermarket, especially 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Huge following yet today. There's a lot of people who still have a great amount of love for these cars, and it's fun to see why. So how is it driving the SVT Focus? Well, it's a normally aspirated engine, so it needs to rev. It wants to build RPM. In fact, the more RPMs you crank this thing out at, the more power it wants to put down. The gearbox is absolutely fantastic. The brakes feel pretty good, feel very strong. The handling of the car is really good. The turn-in, how the rear suspension works, the twist blade rear. The car is very well balanced, but it's also not overly aggressive. You know, if you were to drive this car every day and in the city and in the commuting, and let's say you shifted it to like 3,500 RPMs, this thing would act just like a very well balanced street car. You would never know it's a performance car. The handling is good. The brakes are firm. The suspension is firmer yet somewhat compliant. It doesn't beat you up. It doesn't scream out that this is a race car. It's just a very well balanced, thought out car. I've had this thing on the racetrack before, and it's outstanding on the racetrack as well. The brakes just seem to hold up to almost anything you could throw at it. The way the car responds to you, you definitely feel very well connected to it. In fact, the fastest lap time I've ever put down at Gingerman Raceway is actually in my ZX3. You feel very connected with the car. It just seems to work, especially with the way I like to drive and what I feel comfortable in. The size of the car, the dimensions, my visibility outside, the way everything is, the ergonomics. It's a very well thought out car, and it fits my driving style. So I'm able to drive the car fairly aggressively and feel very confident. So it's a good car to push hard. But in the same token, it doesn't need to be driven like a race car on the street. It's just a very well thought out car. It's great. It's really great. This particular one has 75,000 miles on it, and driving it up and down the street here in Florida, you'd never know it. You'd swear this thing just has a couple thousand miles on it. I mean, really, it's a fantastically maintained car. And I've done a couple things to it when I own the car that my dad still has on it. It's been tuned by FS Works with an SCT tuner. It's got a Steeda Triax Ford Racing short throw shifter, the VF Engineering lower torque mount, and a drop-in K&N filter. So really, you're looking at a lot of the same type of modifications that I've already done or plan on doing very shortly to my Fiesta ST. So there's good similarities, and as you can see, these cars don't need a lot. You're not really, it's not like you got to start all over again when you buy an SVT or ST product. They just come naturally perfect. So how does it compare? Well, one of the first things you notice is that this thing is very mechanical. It's not real big on all the electronic. It doesn't have electronic steering and electronic differential and torque vectoring control and all these electric gizmos getting in the way. This thing is pure. It has stability control, which of course you turn off if you're heading to the track. And this thing is all mechanical. It's pure driving. It's just you and the car out there manipulating what direction it goes. The ST, you get a lot more of what the computer thinks you should be doing. It's not quite as of a pure driving experience. Now, this car also needs a lot more RPM to really make some serious power. And so when you are driving around town, it doesn't feel very powerful because you're not at a lot of RPM. The Fiesta ST, on the other hand, produces an incredible amount of torque at like 2,000, 3,000 RPMs. Just unbelievable. And so when all of a sudden that torque and the turbo spools up and you're all of a sudden getting that, you can feel it in the steering wheel, you can feel it in the way the car wants to just rip off and just scream down the road. The ST is definitely much more of almost like a wild animal that you're like trying to hold the leash on, where it wants to go, it wants to scream. And once that turbo is spooled up at a few thousand RPMs, this thing is flying. And this car, the SVT Focus, is a little bit different than that. It's a different driving style. This thing, you need to build the RPMs and keep the engine in a power band much higher. It's not bad. It's not better. It's not worse. It's just a different way of driving it. The gearbox is absolutely fantastic in the SVT Focus, and it's good in the Fiesta ST as well. It's hard to compare them directly because this has the shifter that I installed that I fell in love with, and so I would say this shifts much better than the Fiesta ST. Now, I'm planning on changing the shifter and the lower torque mount, which I did to this car as well. So that will kind of bring those back to more of a even plane. Both cars are roughly the same size. The Focus is a little bit squattier, a little bit wider, which gives it a more aggressive stance. Also, it feels wider inside the cockpit than the Fiesta ST. But from a handling standpoint, both cars really handle well. This thing definitely feels a little bit more planted, and I think that may be because of the fact that the suspension isn't so taut that on regular public roads where it's not a perfectly glass smooth surface, you don't get so much bouncing around from the rear. So this car definitely feels a little bit more composed, but really there's a lot of similarities between the two. You know you're in a performance compact and not just a regular rental car. The two things are actually very closely related. Brakes. The brakes on this car, it has Hawk HPS pads installed on it. The brakes aren't nearly as sensitive or as touchy as they are on the Fiesta ST. So like when I first get into this, it feels like the pedal has to go way down before it does anything, where the Fiesta, it's like you lightly touch it and you're jerking forward. So it's just a matter of getting that feel right. But otherwise, both cars have outstanding brakes. You could tell that the teams that developed these cars really did a fantastic job. I don't have any good way of measuring performance data, but both cars feel roughly equally as quick, but in different ways. The ST feels like a rocket ship from a dead stop and like rolling around at 2,000, 3,000 RPMs. When you punch it, it takes off like a rocket. This doesn't seem to really do that. This needs more RPM to do it. But both cars are really, really great. Honestly, it's fantastic that we live in a world that Ford Motor Company has built some fantastic front-wheel drive cars. So, if I had the money in my pocket, which one of these would I buy? That makes it tough because I've owned both of them because I love both cars equally. But I do like the Fiesta a little bit more, I think, with the turbo. You get a certain amount of sounds that come from owning a turbo car that you don't get with a normally aspirated one. And I've always wanted a turbocharged car, and now that I have one, I love all the extra noises, and I like seeing the intercooler in the front, and I love hearing the bypass valve and the turbo spooling, and maybe that will grow on me, but for right now, I'd buy my Fiesta ST over the SVT Focus. However, in no way does the Fiesta ST make the SVT Focus obsolete. It doesn't at all. Even with 75,000 miles on the odometer on this thing, it feels as awesome today as it did in 2003. So both cars are amazing, and I don't think you can really put down one or the other. I'd say they're both at the top. These are fantastic cars. I would way rather have an SVT Focus than the Focus ST. This thing is much smaller, more compact. It feels better. It brakes better. It doesn't accelerate as rapid as the Focus ST, but I like the size. I would take the size of this over that. So both cars are really amazing. So I'm glad I was able to come down here to Florida, and thank you for my dad for giving me the opportunity to drive my old car again. It's been great. So we're going to head back to Michigan shortly, and I'm going to have my dad jump in the Fiesta ST and compare and contrast. But I'd say there's a lot of similarities between these two cars, and they are both an absolute blast to drive. So we'll catch you later.